Hello and welcome. We have some breaking news. Great Britain considers delivering Challenger 2 main battle tanks to Ukraine. In this video, we're going to talk about how many tanks can Great Britain actually deliver? What does that mean for the war? And is the Challenger 2 a piece of crap, or is it good? Is it good for something? In this video, you'll learn more about these topics. Sky News is talking. I have a German media here talking about a dozen. So Sky News was lately talking about 10 Challengers to be delivered. The Challenger to deliver the tank, you can see it here by the way, would be more or less a symbolic delivery. We have to openly say that. To train soldiers, to train especially mechanics on a weapon system of which you only have 10, which at the same time is on the absolute front line and thus faces the stress of direct combat, is a challenging mission, but and it will probably not justify the logistics. Also, the other thing is only the British Army, only the Challenger is using rifled cannons, whereas it has the caliber of 120 millimeter. All the other NATO 120 millimeter cannons are smoothbore cannons, so it can't even use the ammo that is coming from other NATO members in 120 millimeter. Ukraine will be completely dependent on the deliveries that will come by Great Britain. What can what will this be useful for? Well, likely good use would probably be on more quiet regions of the front where the combat distance is fairly high and the Ukrainians are facing fortifications, they are facing buildings or something like this, because the British chose the rifled cannon for a reason. Great Britain is one of the old tank building nations, even though they've slacked a little lately. They generally know what they're doing. So the reason for them choosing the rifled cannon, despite knowledge that its penetration against tanks is generally less than smoothbore cannons, has a reason, and that reason is HESH, high explosive squash head ammo, that can be used with the rifled cannon. And it's extremely effective against buildings, against enemy positions, against bunkers, and against light vehicles. As tanks are mostly facing not other tanks, but supporting the infantry, the British choice was simple. We give them the weapon that is best for the mission it does 95% of the time, not for the mission that it does 5% of the time. Using them in these areas would also mean less losses, so they would last longer. That we generally can expect them to head a spearhead down from Zaporizhzhia towards the Azov Sea, thus seems fairly likely. At least it wouldn't make much sense, especially as you have to consider main battle tank is on the absolute front line, especially in an attack, and thus faces another level of strain and thus needs another level of maintenance. And there the question would be, would it even be worth for the Ukrainians to put up all these effort for just 10 tanks? Much more important is the question, is the reason what it means politically. If it comes to that, like right now it says they're considering. It's not that they have already considered or that they've already made a decision or that the deliveries are on their way. But if it comes to that, and it seems fairly likely, that would mean that the taboo has more or less been broken. The German government is still refusing to deliver main battle tanks. There are 100 Leopard 1 tanks in storage of the industry that has offered delivery in March already. Government refuses it. There are several countries that want to deliver Leopard 2. Germany is the producer and thus can say they are not allowed to. And as of now, the German government is still refusing to. The justification by the German government is that we don't want to make some unilateral decision. It has to be coordinated with our partners. And in the past, it has always only been coordinated in a way that Germany did what others already did. So would those 10, if in case those 10 battle tanks are delivered, the effect would not be that there are 10 modern tanks, 10 new modern tanks on the Ukrainian side. The big effect would be that the hesitation of other nations to deliver would be likely be gone, and that the German justification to stop any delivery by others would be gone. But the big question is, will it actually be 10, and will it only be 10? The British Army currently has 227 in storage, but their current plan of modernization to the Challenger 3 only accounts for 148. So that means 227 minus 148, 79 of those will no longer be needed according to the current British Army plans. At least that's what I found, and they don't seem to have changed that even during the Ukraine war. Even during Ukraine war, there has been no revision in the requirements for the British Army when it comes to the main battle tanks. That means that theoretically, the British Army currently runs 79 tanks more than it actually needs. But the fact is, the British are already running more tanks than they currently need, because they have them in storage, not in long-term storage, but in short-term storage at places where they regularly use them, but where they don't have unit stations. One of those examples is Sennelager, which is a training ground in Germany, where they have main battle tanks, where they have Challenger 2 stationed. That's obviously for obvious reasons. If you regularly move units around and regularly between specific places, it's a much easier, much more convenient way to simply leave the heavy equipment in place. It's cheaper. It spares you the hassle. You can just fly the people there. So for the training in Germany, the tanks are there, and obviously they can be used in case of an emergency. You just need to fly the crews in, and the tanks can start. Theoretically, Britain doesn't need those tanks. Now, we have to be honest here. This is a theoretic possibility. It's highly unlikely that the British are giving up those tanks, even though they are not necessary for their current units. But at least it's a theoretical possibility. But the question was, for me, they had over 300 tanks. What happened to the others? So I researched a little, and if I'm not wrong, this is more or less a site where questions by parliamentarians to the government are published. So and here a conservative, Marc François, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, but it's a French name. So Marc François asked how many have been sold, how many Challenger 2, how many are in long-term storage, and how many are still in operational service. And the government answered that 72, none have been sold, and 72 are in long-term storage. So those 72 Challenger 2s are nowhere in the books. They are in addition to the 227. This means they will obviously not be combat ready. Long-term storage means that the work that has to be put in is much more than just replacing the oil to grease some places and then fill it up and it can start. But it means that those tanks are in a shape, depending, obviously, we don't know the exact state they are in, how much effort the British put into maintaining long-term storage equipment, but that means that they are in a shape that can be restored, and that they are in a shape that can be restored within reasonable amounts. So it won't take years if the British industry really puts an effort into this. In total, we can also, so when we add up the two numbers, at least theoretically, that means 154 Challenger 2s are disposable if Britain, and this is the big if, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is not a prediction of me or a declaration that the fact is 154 are being delivered. The question is, how many could they deliver if they really wanted to? And the number I come to is 154 Challenger 2s, as they have 79 too many for their future plans of the army, and as they have 75 in long-term storage. Obviously, the question is, how long would it take? Theoretically, they could take some out of the armed forces and replace them later with rebuilt tanks from storage. There are some options there, whether the British are willing to reduce their training and thus the qualification and the combat capability of their tank units to help Ukraine now will be a different question, and a question I can't answer for you. But the question, how many Challenger 2 could be delivered, is 154 within reasonable amounts, and that should be more. That's more than a Ukrainian tank brigade actually uses. So now we are talking that Challenger 2 might equip a complete armored brigade by the Ukrainians, and now we're talking about a level where suddenly training, supply chain, maintenance, etc. suddenly makes sense. But when we are talking that the Ukrainians might, maybe later that year, as said, I can't emphasize enough, we're talking about theoretic possibilities here. When they have this many, when there might be the possibility of them having a brigade of Challenger 2, how good are they actually? Now, you probably don't read German media, so you haven't read the news media there, but there are some emphasizing that the tank is less good than Western one because it has a rifled cannon. Right now, this tank, the Challenger 2, is probably the best protected, the best armored Western tank in existence. There are claims like this all the time. We have to say that the numbers of armor and the effectiveness are guarded secret. We can all find numbers, we can all find displays, graphs, etc. But how well armored they are in effect is officially a secret, as well as with the guns, how powerful they are. While you can find a lot of numbers, those who know the exact numbers, the exact data, will not give them to you until that tank has left service and the informations are no longer guarded secret. But generally, the Challenger 2 is considered to be the best protected by many, not by all, obviously. And if you are insistent, if you want to help with the algorithm, you can comment in the comment section that no, the M1 Abrams is the best, or maybe you're European and want to claim that the Leopard 2 is the best protected. But while the British are not just the inventors for the Chopin armor, which we can see here, there's one argument that it might actually be the best protected, which is that if fully equipped to the maximum with all possible additional armor, all fuel, crew, armament, it weighs a whopping 75 metric tons. That's 75,000 kilograms, and that is almost 10 tons. A full 10 tons more than the latest version of the Leopard 2 or the M1 Abrams. So in this regard, it's much heavier, and unless we assume that the British are suddenly incapable of building a good tank and thus added ballast just to increase the weight, that would be an indication that the armor is probably actually the best within the Western world. And there are at least some reports of how well the Challenger 2 shrugged off even modern anti-tank weapons in Iraq when it was deployed there with the British, where the resistance, where the terrorists used anti-tank weapons supplied by Iran with modern penetrators, and they still shrugged most of the attacks against them off like nothing happened, whereas we have seen losses with other tanks that have been used there. So the Challenger 2 is probably the best armored tank in the world. Maybe even in the world. You could argue that the T-14 Armata might be better, but then we come in the discussion whether it's ever going to be in real existence or it's stopped now. But when we come to Western tanks, it should at the very least be on par with Abrams and Leopard. Whether it's actually better, us as analysts, us as viewers, will probably not be able to determine, but it should definitely be a close match to the other contestants, so it's a very well protected tank. The gun doesn't just have a thermal sleeve, as we can see here, which is unique and not really common within other Western tanks, but its main strength is actually the HESH, which I already mentioned. High explosive squash head. You can understand it like some Play-Doh. So when this is the armor plate, the shot comes and squashes on it, and only after that it detonates and it causes splinter to separate from the other side of the armor, so from the inside, that then hit the crew and the ammo and can ignite it and can fully destroy the tank and not just the crew. The big advantage by HESH is that it's range independent. It is as it is explosive, as it is a chemical round. It is irrelevant at which speed it hits its target, unlike a penetrator that is working with pure mass, like an APFSDS, like we can see here. The HESH is irrelevant from speed, so it's much more effective at longer distances. The official claimants are that it can be used at 5 kilometers and more. And there is the rumor, the claim, I found the claim that a British Challenger 1 with 120mm HESH rounds had destroyed in the first Gulf War, in the second Gulf War, in the first Iraq War. Challenger 1 destroyed an Iraqi T-55 at over 5,400 meters, excuse me, which supposedly is the longest confirmed tank kill in history, even though you will find some claims that German tank destroyers in World War II have destroyed tanks at longer distances. But this was the longest confirmed tank kill that I found, because HESH is not just with its explosive, it is a multi-purpose round. It can destroy heavy armor, like on a T-55, but it's perfectly suited against buildings, against bunkers, against field fortifications, and against lightly armored vehicles. So while it is effective against tanks too, that unfortunately has to be said, it's more or less in the past. With the introduction of explosive reactive armor and sandwich armor, so where different layers of armor are following up on each other, HESH has lost almost completely its effectiveness against those types of armors. That means it's still effective against a BMP-1 or a BMP-2 or a BTR. It will still utterly destroy it. It will destroy the bunkers we have seen in the Ukraine war that are set up by the Russians. It can do heavy damage on buildings from which Russian fighters are fighting. But if it faces a modern Russian tanks or generally a tank with sandwich armor, which is no longer rolled homogeneous steel like on the T-62, by the way, an unmodified T-62, or on the T-55, the HESH will be more or less useless. This is an argument. While they say it's not as useful, at least I found some in the German media, because the AP-FSDS, which is the non-plus ultra when it comes to tank penetration in the world right now, it is less effective if it has rotation, which a rifled cannon creates and a smoothbore doesn't. That's why the other systems have switched to smoothbore. So while the British 120 millimeter rifled in principle is less effectiveness, that should not mean that we should discount it or that the Russians should discount it. Very likely the British AP-FSDS isn't actually that far worse than modern Western tank rounds for several reasons. First of all, the British are using the L55 cannon, which means it has a length, the barrel has a length of 55 calibers, whereas the majority of the RH-120 cannons that are being used from the Abrams to the Ariete, I think, uses it, and the Leopard versions, the majority are using the L44, so 11 length of caliber shorter than the L55. The RH-120 L55 was only introduced in the Leopard 2A6 and onwards. So it started off with a longer caliber length, which allows the projectile to be propelled longer, and with a AP-FSDS, the weight of the projectile and its speed hitting the target is essential for the penetration. So the faster it's being shot out, obviously the higher the penetration is as well. This gives an edge for the Challenger 2 in compared at least to the RH-120 L44 cannons, but that's not all. The number I found now is that the latest depleted uranium penetrator by the British, the Charm 3, is supposedly penetrating over 700 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor. That's a number that has to be put into some perspective, but supposedly the German DM63, which is being shot out of the Leopard 2A6 and A7 with the L55 cannon, is only at 750, 780, something in those numbers. So it's 10%, roughly 10%, maybe even less difference in the overall penetration. Now, 10% is not little when it comes to high-end elements. The realistic amount of difference is probably in the 1 digit to very low 2 digits, so maybe 10, 12, at most 15%. But we need to put it into perspective with the Ukrainian war. The majority of the rounds being used by the Ukrainians, especially in their main battle tank, the T-64BV, is the 3BM42 Mango round, and that has, from what I found, a penetration of 440 millimeters. So getting the Challenger 2 with its AP-FSDS, it's like once I lost the going, I can't remember the name. So armor piercing, fin stabilized discarding saber round. Once we compare them with what the Ukrainians currently use, we are suddenly from 440 up to 700 in probably one of the best protected tanks in the world. So we should refrain significantly from discounting the Challenger 2 just because he has a rifled cannon. It doesn't mean that it's not worse against other tanks. That's the reason why the British are switching to the Challenger. With the Challenger 3, they are actually finally switching to a smoothbore cannon. But there might be ammo compatibility also be a reason, because right now they can't switch guns, they can't switch the shells. But the other thing is, what we always need to remember is that the majority of all uses of tanks in Ukraine war, as in reality, is not fighting other tanks. It's supporting the infantry, protecting it, and attacking the others' infantry. So the majority of its targets it will face will be fortifications, infantry concentrations, and lightly armored vehicles like IFVs and APCs. And for those, HESH is still extremely potent and extremely powerful. In total, we can say it's a very good tank and a very potent tank. It will have some issues because of its enormous weight. That will create logistical issues even if the rest is solved, because there will be bridges that were never meant to carry such a weight. That will challenge the Ukrainians to a certain degree. We still don't have any clear, first of all, as while I'm recording, I have not read the confirmation of it actually being delivered. It seems fairly likely that they will, but the next thing is we don't know the number yet. It might stick with those 10s, but the theoretical potential of them is actually delivering 154, which is somewhat realistic. And then the Ukrainians could receive 154, so more than an armored brigade's worth of high-end, powerful Western main battle tanks. And that would obviously create make more nations to make the decision to deliver tanks themselves. That's it from me for now. Oh, when we come to the cannon, I could mention one more thing. The special thing about the British is that their cannons uses two-part ammunition. What we see here is a one-piece. It's like a cartridge for a pistol, just much bigger. You push it in and that's it. The British use two-part ammunition, and that, when it comes to penetration, obviously gives them somewhat more wiggle room, because the weight, I said, and the speed of the penetrator is decisive for the penetration. And you can easily increase the weight without changing its majority of its characteristics by simply prolonging it, by making it longer and having a tube here. Obviously, there's a little choice. It can either point out at the tip and it can reach the bottom plate, but once it's more or less there, there's not much that they can do. And the two-piece ammunition can, at least theoretically, allow for a little more wiggle room when it comes to the penetrator itself. And that's another explanation why the Charm 3, why the British, I think it's L12, if I'm not completely wrong, but while that cannon is not that far worse off, and as said, like, it will be able to destroy the majority of the Russian tanks even from the front. It might have some issues with the T90M, with the T72 B3M, with the T80 BVM or something like this, but we see the Ukrainians still managing to destroy Russian tanks all along, while having far less capable tanks. In total, a powerful tank, potentially up to a brigade worth, and it will, if it comes to that, and it seems likely, that should start a cascade of other nations donating tanks to Ukraine, and thus stuff the Ukrainian armed forces, staff them with much more powerful weaponry for the next year, or for this year's year of fighting. That's it from me for now. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. If you like the video, I'd very much appreciate a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future updates. I do a lot of situation reports where I present the current developments on the front, some backgrounds, and put it all into perspective as well as I can. And if you want to leave comments and explain to me that I have no idea and the Challenger 2 is actually horrible and the M1 Abrams is the best, or the Leopard, then obviously you're free to do so and you're invited to do so. Maybe I can learn something from you, and if not, even then, you're helping with the algorithm, so it would really help. If you want to support the channel further, you can share it with friends and acquaintances. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.